I was jolted awake by the sound of tires crunching gravel just outside my window. At first, I thought maybe it was a delivery truck turning around. But then I saw flashing blue and red lights bouncing across the walls of my cabin. My heart sank. I hadn't done anything wrong. I was just spending a quiet weekend at my lake ranch, the one I'd worked years to afford. But before I could even get my boots on, I heard loud knocking and voices outside, one of them unmistakably familiar. It was Karen from the HOA. She was standing with two police officers pointing toward my cabin like I was some kind of intruder. "That man is trespassing," she was yelling. "This land belongs to my son." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I came out half asleep and totally confused, trying to stay calm while explaining that I owned the place. I even had my property deed in a folder inside. But Karen wouldn't back down. The cops didn't come in guns blazing or anything, but they definitely seemed unsure about who to believe. And Karen, well, if you've ever dealt with someone who acts like the entire neighborhood belongs to them, you already know how bold she can be. She was waving around a photo of her son, like that proved ownership. Said he was meant to inherit the land as if that somehow made it his. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. Karen knew exactly what she was doing. She'd had her eye on this spot for a long time, and now she was trying to take it by force, or at least by bluff. What she didn't count on was that I had proof. But just as I turned to get my papers, one of the officers suddenly stepped forward and said something that flipped everything upside down. The officer held up a hand and said, "Sir, I'm going to need you to stay right here." His tone had changed, more serious now, and it caught me off guard. Karen smirked like she'd already won. I kept thinking, what did I miss? This was my property. I'd closed on it 6 months ago. I'd gone through the proper channels, paid the taxes, updated the address with the county. Everything was legit. Still, the officer pulled Karen aside and they started whispering. She handed him a manila envelope, something she must have brought with her. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but she kept glancing over at me like she was trying to sell some dramatic tale. That's when I realized this wasn't just a spur-of-moment accusation. She'd planned this. For a bit of context, Karen's family has lived near the lake for decades. Her late husband had once owned a big chunk of property there, but most of it got sold off years ago, either during probate or due to back taxes no one really knows for sure. When I bought my lot, it was through a clean real estate deal with the county. There wasn't a single mention of her son or any claim tied to the family name. But ever since I moved in and started fixing up the cabin, she'd been watching. Sometimes she'd stand on the trail just past my fence, arms crossed, not saying a word. Other times, she'd wave like we were neighbors, like she wasn't just waiting for the right moment to stir something up. Now, here she was, with cops at my door and some mysterious evidence that I had supposedly stolen land meant for her son. I didn't know what she was pulling, but I had a feeling this was only the beginning. As the officer flipped through Karen's envelope, I stood there trying to stay calm, but my mind was racing. What could she possibly have in there? The deed was in my name. I had paperwork, bank records, emails, everything. But she looked too confident for this to be a bluff. That's when the second officer, younger and more neutral looking, walked over to me and quietly asked, "Do you mind if we take a look at your ownership documents?" I nodded and went inside to grab the folder I always kept in a drawer by the fireplace. While I searched, I kept replaying the last few months in my head. Karen had started getting more aggressive ever since I installed the new dock. It wasn't anything fancy, just a floating platform for fishing and tying up my small boat. But she showed up that same afternoon with her arms crossed and said, "You know, that part of the lake was always my son's favorite fishing spot." At the time, I thought it was just nostalgia talking, but now it felt more like a warning I didn't catch. What made it stranger was that I'd never actually seen her son. She talked about him constantly, how he was a Marine, how he planned to come back and build a house on this land, how his late father promised him the lakefront someday. But there was no record, no listing in the property sales, no claim filed at the county office. I checked all that before closing the deal. Still, something about the way the officer hesitated while looking at her documents started to get to me. Was there something I didn't know? Some loophole? An old will? Meanwhile, a few neighbors had gathered on the gravel road, whispering and watching. One of them, Dave, gave me a slow nod like he knew something too, but wasn't ready to say it out loud. And just when I stepped back outside with my papers in hand, I heard Karen say to the officer, "Check the survey lines." He built his dock on our side of the water. The second she mentioned the survey lines, both officers stiffened. The older one looked over at me, his eyes sharp now, like something had shifted. "Sir, do you know where your property lines officially end?" he asked. I held out my folder and said, "Everything's in here: title, plat map, GPS coordinates, all of it." But even as I spoke, I started second-guessing myself. What if the dock had gone a few feet over? Could that really trigger this whole mess? Karen walked closer, still clinging to that envelope like it was gold. He moved the boundary markers. I saw him. My son staked this land when he was a teenager, years before this man even knew it existed. Her voice cracked a little, but it felt rehearsed, calculated. The officers exchanged glances again. I handed them my documents, my palms slick with sweat. They stepped aside to compare everything. The older cop had Karen's envelope in one hand and my property map in the other. For several minutes, they paced up and down the gravel, stopping by the edge of the dock and squinting at a red-tipped survey stake partially buried near the trees. Karen was right behind them the whole time, pointing, whispering. Back at the cabin, spotted Dave again, standing by his truck with his arms folded. I walked over. "You know something you're not saying?" I asked quietly. He looked me up and down. "I don't like getting involved in drama," he muttered. "But just so you know, Karen tried the same thing with the last guy who tried to buy this place. Ran him off in 2 weeks. Claimed it belonged to her son, too. That hit hard. If this was a pattern, why hadn't anyone said anything? And why was she so sure the cops might take her side this time? I turned just in time to see the older officer walking back up the driveway, holding both sets of documents, his face unreadable. The older officer stopped a few feet from me, his face still hard to read. He looked down at the papers in his hand, then back up at me. "Your documents check out," he said slowly. "But there's something else." He turned to Karen. "You didn't mention that your family filed a boundary dispute claim just last week with the county. It's not fully processed yet, but it's pending." My stomach dropped. I hadn't heard a word about any new claim. No notice, no letters, nothing in the records when I checked a few weeks back. A claim? For what? "She doesn't even own the lot next to me anymore," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Karen raised her chin like she'd been waiting to play this card. "My son filed it," she said calmly. "That stake was placed decades ago, and it was always on our land. It's just because the county made a mistake doesn't mean we'll be cheated out of what's ours." Now things were starting to make a lot more sense. She wasn't just playing dirty, she was trying to use the system to corner me legally. By filing that claim, she'd created just enough of a gray area to drag law enforcement into the mix and maybe scare me into backing off. But it didn't stop there. Dave, who'd been quietly watching, suddenly stepped forward. "You said your son filed the claim." He asked, eyes narrowing.
How?
"Because I saw him at the gas station last week. He told the clerk he wasn't interested. In coming back, said the lake was cursed or something. Sounded like he wanted nothing to do with this place." Karen's face flushed. She started to speak, then stopped. The officers noticed, too. The younger one raised a brow. "Ma'am, Can you confirm your son actually authorized this claim? Did he sign it himself? Karen didn't answer right away. Instead, she clutched her purse tighter, looked down, and for the first time all morning, she looked nervous. Karen stayed silent for a long moment, her eyes darting between the officers and the few neighbors still watching from a distance. Finally, she let out a shaky breath and said, "My son didn't file it. I did. I signed it for him." The air around us seemed to freeze. Even the birds went quiet. The older officer's face darkened. "You forged his signature on a legal document?" he asked. She didn't deny it, just said he would have agreed. This land was supposed to be his anyway. That was it. The whole act came crashing down. Karen had faked a boundary claim, lied to the cops, and dragged me into this chaos, all because she couldn't accept that the land she once imagined for her son had been legally sold. The officers took her aside, started making calls, and within minutes it was clear she was in serious trouble. It wasn't just trespassing or harassment anymore, was filing a false claim and impersonating someone in a county document. One of the neighbors whispered, "She's finally gone too far." Dave gave me a nod, like justice had finally caught up. I was still holding my documents, heart pounding, unsure whether to feel relieved or angry. The officers told me I was in the clear, and they'd be reporting the incident to the county recorder. Karen wasn't arrested on the spot, but they made it clear legal action was likely coming. Just as I was turning to go back into the cabin, I noticed something odd by the edge of the dock. A small, weathered post sticking out of the ground older than the rest of the markers, half buried. Curious, I tugged it loose. Attached was a rusted metal tag with initials carved into it, TB-1982. Not Karen's family, someone else entirely. That's when Dave walked over again and said, "You might want to look deeper. That post's from before Karen ever lived here. And it might mean your land was part of an even older dispute no one ever talked about." I stood there staring at that rusted tag, the initials barely visible under decades of grime. It was a reminder that this land had a history deeper than either Karen or I realized. Dave leaned in, arms crossed. That's old ranch land. Before the lake homes, before the HOA, this was open range. TB was a cattleman, way back. Folks say his property lines got mixed up when the county redrew maps in the 90s. He paused. That stake means your deed's probably more solid than anyone thought. You didn't just buy this place, you bought a piece of forgotten history. The next week, the county confirmed it. Not only was Karen's boundary claim thrown out, but the tag I found helped clear up a long-standing mapping error. My dock, my cabin, every inch was well within the true boundaries. Karen, facing pressure from the HOA board and legal trouble from the forged claim, quietly withdrew from public view. Her son, who had nothing to do with any of it, called me personally to apologize and said he hadn't spoken to his mom in months. He had no interest in the lake, the land, or anything tied to the past. With the drama behind me, I finally had peace. The lake ranch wasn't just mine legally, it felt like mine in every way. No more early morning surprises, no more false claims, just the sound of the water, the wind through the trees, and the calm I'd worked so hard to find. I even left that old post right where I found it, a quiet marker of all the stories this land had seen. And if there's anything I learned through all this, it's that standing your ground doesn't always mean fighting loud. Sometimes it just means being patient and letting the truth speak for itself.